What is up, nation? AJ Riley here for another edition of The Corner. The trade deadline has passed, and we are now looking forward to 2023 because it's the Tigers, and they did exactly what we figured they would do at the deadline. We're not even going to talk about it because there's really nothing to talk about. They got rid of two expiring contracts and got very little back for them, but they did get, something back at least. It is what it is. I'm not even here to talk about it because there are definitely more important things to talk about. We're going to talk about two legends tonight. One of them very highly recognized. The other one somewhat under the radar and has not gotten his due, but he's starting to get his due coming this weekend. We're also going to recap the Twin Series and preview the Rays series. But before we get to that, I want to remind you to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and click that bell on YouTube for all of your Detroit sports news. And you can also follow The Corner on Twitter at DSN at The Corner. And as we always do, we lead off the show with the leadoff. And there's no other person that we need to talk about in the leadoff than the voice of baseball, Mr. Vin Scully. And to help me do that, I have a friend with me. His name is Matt Bassin. And Matt Bassin, you'll know from the show Griffin. You may even recognize him from former shows like Throwing Stones and Straight Shooting as well. But what you may not know about this guy right here is that he spent a very formidable portion of his life in California, in the radio game, and was under or had the privilege of listening to Mr. Scully day in and day out. And as you know by now, August 2nd, late at night, Vin Scully, the voice of the Dodgers and truly the voice of baseball, passed away at the ripe old age of 94. Had he made it to November, he would have been 95. But Matt, this is a huge loss.
Yes, absolutely, AJ, and thank you for having me. And to everybody out there, I just want to say hi, everybody, and a very pleasant good evening to you, wherever you may be.
And yes, that is how Vin would have. That's exactly how Vin would have addressed this crowd. You're exactly right, because that's how he started every broadcast.
I was lucky enough. My family moved to Southern California when I was 10 years old in 1992, and was never a Dodger fan. But God, did I love growing up listening to Vin Scully. My childhood was spoiled. I had Vin Scully for baseball. I had Chick Hearn for basketball. If I popped over to the Angels broadcast, there was another legend. Oh God, why am I blanking all of a sudden on his name? I'll get to it, I'm sure. But very spoiled growing up in Southern California with the broadcasters that we had, and just like you said, Vin Scully. There's no better storyteller in the history of baseball on a microphone. It was a thing to behold.
It was, and I don't know about you, but I found myself today seeing all the clips posted on Twitter and watching just about every single one of them. The story that he told about when he raced Jackie Robinson on ice skates. Like
Dick Enberg. That's who was doing that.
That's who you're thinking about with the Angels. There you go. See, I knew it would pop in your mind as soon as I started talking. Yeah, but like the storytelling is, I think, what set him apart. Now, what people know, but sometimes can be forgotten, is Vin did these games on his own.
Yep.
He did not have a color guy with him for the majority of the time. Now, when he was doing national broadcasts or World Series or whatever, he would. But he kept you engaged, and as I wrote in my editorial piece, Remembering Vin Scully, it was like he was inviting you into a living room to watch the game with him. That's all it was. Anytime that he broadcast a game, it was like sitting around with a friend or sitting at the feet of your grandfather, if you're my age, and just listening to him talk about the days gone by, right? A man that literally spent time with the man who broke the color barrier. And then, almost 30 years later, is on the call when a man of color breaks the home run record. Like, this guy, in the way that he was so integral to seminal moments, is uncanny. uncanny.
I mean, all the credit in the absolute world to him and what he did. But
67 years.
Talk about right place, right time to get started.
Yeah.
Fresh out of college, and he's got a little thing in D.C., and Red Barber, of all people, hears of him and hears his stuff and invites him to come to Brooklyn. At 22 years old, AJ, at 22 years old, I was still in college. I wasn't even out of college yet, and I was trying to do the same thing he did. But at 22 years old, Red Barber brings him over to Brooklyn to start broadcasting Yankee games. At 25 years old, he's calling a World Series, the youngest to ever do it. And he goes on to have a 65-plus year career from Ebbets Field to Chavez Ravine, from Jackie to Kershaw and everyone in between. And along the way, he also called the Masters. Yep. He also called The Catch. And San Francisco 49ers fans know what I'm talking about. This man was so blessed to be in the right place at the right time for a lot of things, and he was the right voice for it as well. And he never let it make him too big at the same time.
No, and anytime, even in his sign-off, when he called his last game in Giants Stadium, PNC Park in San Francisco, he said, "I have always believed that I've needed you more than you've needed me." And that was a sentiment that he carried with him the whole time. And it's interesting that you bring him coming up at 22 to Brooklyn. Because there's somebody here in Detroit that we are very fond of. And I would say the 1B broadcaster of all time, with Vin being, the 1A broadcaster. But Ernie Harwell has said and been on record, he said, "My greatest contribution to baseball history is leaving the number 3 spot broadcasting for the Brooklyn Dodgers and going to the New York Giants so that a man named Vin Scully could take my place." And it's so just the interconnectedness, right, of these two icons in the broadcasting world, 2 of the best who have ever done it, for their story to be so inextricably connected. I was actually reading a story from the Free Press, and this was at the time I think that Vin was calling his last game back in 2016. And they were talking about his connection with Ernie Harwell. Ernie Harwell in 1949 called a triple play that I believe the Yankees turned. A triple play in 1949. Then, fast forward to like the mid-90s, and they're squaring off, and there's another triple play turned by the Yankees. It was the first one since 49 that they had turned, according to this report. And in the booth, across a glass partition, you have Vin Scully doing play-by-play, and then Harwell doing play-by-play for the CBS radio at the time. And they said in the story that Vin Scully leaned around the partition and tried to get Ernie to recall what happened back in 1949 on the triple play. And he said, "Vin, I don't rightly remember." And that was the one and only time that those two were on air together. But just such a fantastic connection. You also have Vin calling the 1984 World Series. So, like, he's connected to Detroit sports as well. Mm-hmm. And it's just a huge loss. I mean, he's 94 years old, right? But it's like almost losing a family member at a certain point.
It is. And for selfish reasons, obviously, we want him still here, of course. But, he retired. He worked, quote unquote, until he was 88 years old, 89 years old.
As one of our friends said, he didn't work a day in his life.
Right, like he got to do what he loved till he was 88 years old. So he wasn't going to have much of a retirement anyway. And then when his wife passed away from ALS complications, beginning of 2021, this was another tragedy that this poor man had to live through. He lost his first wife to a medicine overdose. He lost his son in a helicopter crash. And then, late in life, obviously, but his second wife, Sandy, was a lot younger, and she gets ALS. And so now he's lost her. And he's 93 years old, 92 years old. It's when you lose that much, at some point it's, what am I even still doing here at this point? But
Yeah.
I wanted to get back to what with the Ernie Harwell stuff, because I'll bet you a young Vin didn't want Ernie to take that job because the New York Giants were Vin Scully's favorite team growing up as a child. So I'm sure he would have loved him and calling their games. Sure. Still would have ended up moving to the West Coast in the end, but there's never enough to be said. I know I'm harping
and
on
words can't adequately.
No.
Yeah, words can't even adequately describe it, right?
It's
just
definitely not. But
I always go back to one of our favorite movies, though, right? Heroes will get remembered, but legends never die.
And part of what makes him a legend, look, I know the catch. Didn't know Vin Scully called it. I know Hank Aaron's 715th home run. Didn't know Vin Scully called it. He was put in these positions to be the one to call these. How is it, out of all teams, the Braves are facing the Dodgers when Hank Aaron has a chance to pass Babe Ruth? So now you've got Vin Scully, and he's hitting you right in the feels when he makes the call, where he's talking about it's a marvelous moment for baseball, what a marvelous moment for Atlanta, the state of Georgia, what a marvelous moment for the country and the world. A black man is getting a standing ovation in the Deep South for breaking a record of an all-time baseball idol. Who else is going to even think to say that in the broadcast booth? I don't think anybody is but Vin Scully. It was right place, right time, but it was by divine intervention that he was in these spots.
Yes. Yeah, and again, nobody could have handled that moment with more grace and more eloquence. And just you keep talking about these moments. Kirk Gibson's home run in 1984 off of Goose Gossage. Kirk Gibson's home run off of Dennis Eckersley, who had not given up a home run since August 24th of that year.
Off the bench.
Two bad legs.
Off the bench.
Two bad legs. Hurt left hamstring, so he can't drive off of it. Hurt right knee, so he can't plant on it, and literally has to swing all arms. And there she goes. The impossible, or the improbable, has become impossible, or whatever. I just butchered it.
In a year that has been so improbable, the impossible has happened.
The impossible has happened, yeah. And it...
Behind the bag, he gets through Buckner. How is that Vin Scully and all of these?
I know. He's there. Don Larson's perfect game in the World Series. The only perfect game that has ever been thrown in the World Series. Who's on the call? Vin Scully. When you talk about the voice of baseball, you're talking about Vin Scully. And there have been good broadcasters. Ernie Harwell was a great broadcaster. And I love when he says, there's a long drive to left, right? Like, we grew up with that. We know Ernie. But there was Vin Scully. And as a baseball fan, I grew up with Vin. I mean, who even knew? He was the voice of all the early baseball video games. PlayStation 2. That I used to mute because I thought that it was annoying. And then I learned, it's Vin Scully. I'm going to listen to what he says. And man, he just kept just ringing it in and ringing it in. This man is beyond words. And he was not gone too soon. I mean, 94, he lived a good life. And we have to say goodbye. But, as we have said, legends never die. And a voice for the ages now belongs to the ages. Vin Scully, the best broadcaster who has ever lived, 67 years as a Dodgers broadcaster, retired in 2016. He passed away August 2nd, 2022, after a life in baseball, but a life on earth well lived. And forever, Vin, we tip our hats and we just say thank you. We are going to move on. Matt, I do want to say thank you for joining me tonight on The Corner, reminiscing about old Vin and the magic that he brought to this beautiful game of baseball. I'm going to get in talking about the losing Tigers in Minnesota and recap that series next.
You have fun with that.
All right, so let's get into this series with the Minnesota Twins that has just become about rinse and repeat for the Detroit Tigers. Another series lost, another series that potentially could have been won, but yet they fall 2-1 in a 3-game set against the Minnesota Twins in walk-off fashion in Game 1, losing 5-3, where then Tiger Michael Fulmer was not so great, gave up 4 hits and 2 runs in the 8th inning, which was his last appearance as a Tiger. And if you remember back to our trade deadline talk, there was this guy that predicted where Fulmer would go. Rental bullpen pieces, unless their name is Aroldis Chapman, are not going to fetch top-tier prospects. Fulmer's had his bumps in the road. He is a free agent at the end of the season. He's a very cheap rental. But I would not expect the world for Michael Fulmer. Some teams that, he could potentially fit at, and I hate to say this first one, but Minnesota. They have the 29th best bullpen in Major League Baseball. They desperately need bullpen help, and you're a little less concerned trading him in division given the fact that he is a rental. Look, it was a bit of a shock, even though I had pegged Minnesota as a team that Fulmer could end up on because of the last-minute aspect of the deal, and the fact that even though I said in that video, listen, there's not going to be much of a return for a rental reliever. Every baseball insider said that teams were looking for controllable relievers. Fulmer's not that, so the return was not going to be large. It doesn't mean you necessarily have to like the return that Alavila got. A 24-year-old right-handed pitcher that's in Double-A. Just adding to the organizational pitching depth. No bat that could possibly pop off or at least fill a role. Nothing was addressed at the trade deadline, and that maybe is fine. I said I wasn't going to talk about it. It's probably better that nothing was necessarily addressed because we didn't want Al making those moves. But that still doesn't mean that you can't be underwhelmed by the get back for Michael Fulmer. So Michael Fulmer pitched his last game in Game 1 on Monday. And then in Game 2, Michael Fulmer was a Twin. He did not pitch. Tarek Skubal actually started that game for the Tigers and was removed after 5 innings, which was nerve-wracking. Or that was on Monday. I'm sorry, that was Game 1 on Monday. It was nerve-wracking because you thought maybe he could have potentially been traded. But it comes out that he's got arm fatigue, a little bit of a forearm issue in that left arm, and so he's been placed on the 15-day DL or IL. The one pitcher from our opening day rotation who had not hit the injured list yet has now bit the dust. And they can be cautious with him, and they probably should be cautious with him because at the end of the day, this team's 22 games under 500. This team is not going anywhere, and eyes need to turn to 2023. The Tigers did win Game 2, where they hit the ball a little bit, enough to win 5-3. In Game 3, they lost 4-1. And it was brutal. 41 strikeouts for the Tigers offense in 3 games. 41 strikeouts in 3 games. Fulmer, obviously, in his last appearance was not good. And they made Aaron Sanchez out to be Nolan Ryan. The swings and misses that he was getting and the amount of just terrible at-bats were not good. Now, there's not much to say. The Twins own the Tigers. That's all there is to it at this point. They're a first-place team for a reason. They got better during the trade deadline. And this Tigers team's just kind of spinning its wheels. There's no way forward, really. Now you got young guys that we got to figure out what are we going to do with them. They traded Robbie Grossman, so that opens up a spot to at least get some young guys some run, which was an okay move. Listen, you weren't going to get much for Grossman. I told you previously as well, and I'm not going to show you a video on that because that guy in the video needed a shave and a haircut. But I told you that Robbie was either going to get traded somehow or DFA'd at some point. And they were able to get something for him. A 20-year-old left-handed pitcher. Who knows? He could be something. He may not be. Most likely more organizational pitching depth. But what this series is kind of that white flag moment. Now, AJ Hinch is going to tell you that they're going to try to win the game that day. And they should. They're professionals and they should go out to win. And I am not by any means suggesting that we tank. This team's going to be a top 5 draft pick again, no matter how hard they try. But what's important in these series coming up and over these next 2 months is how much consistent playing time does Victor Reyes get? Kerry Carpenter, when he makes his debut, how does he adjust to the major leagues? Over the next 2 months, can Spencer Torkelson hit enough in AAA to get back to the major leagues? Newsflash, he's not doing well down there either. I think Scott Coolball broke him. But it's time to start looking at 2023. Get the young guys consistent playing time to see what you have. So hopefully your new GM will be able to make a decision on them. And it's not going to get prettier. Because now, this weekend, Tampa Bay comes to town. Old friend Isaac Paredes is going to be back in Comerica Park. Tampa Bay Ray home run leader Isaac Paredes, I might add, with 14 home runs. They're coming to town and it could get ugly. They're a potential wild card team. And their pitching is stiff. Let me give you the pitching matchups, and we'll get into what they do well and what they don't do well. Then we're going to talk about one of my favorite players of all time. Game 1, Thursday, 7:10. Jeffrey Spring is going to be facing off against Drew Hutchinson. Jeffrey Spring is 3-3 on the season with a 2.70 ERA and a 1.12 whip. He strikes out about 9.5 batters per 9 innings and walks about 2 per 9 innings. And while he has a 2.70 ERA, his FIP is actually 3.72, which means he's pitched a little bit worse than what his earned run average would indicate. On his volition alone, focused solely on the things that he has the outcome over, he's pitched worse than what his ERA would indicate. Drew Hutchinson will try to replicate what he did in Toronto. He had 5 good innings in Toronto over this past weekend. Had to be removed after, tweaking his ankle a little bit, covering first. But he's 1-4 this season with a 4.53 ERA. Only strikes out about 6 per 9 innings. Walks up about 4 per 9 innings. And he is getting hit hard. His hard hit rate is at about 33%. So 33% of the time, 1 out of every 3 batters is hitting him hard, which is 95 miles per hour off the bat or higher. Game 2, Friday night, is going to feature Corey Kluber. Not the Corey Kluber that we were used to in a Cleveland uniform, but a little bit older and a little bit worse Corey Kluber. Yet, Corey Kluber still strikes out about 8 per 9. He only walks about 1.3 per 9. And even though his ERA is 4.03, his FIP is actually 3.37, which indicates he's been pitching a lot better than what that number would indicate. We do not know who will be facing off against him on Friday. You could potentially see a move for, Brian Garcia, who had a good outing in Toronto. Maybe another young guy is going to be up again to make that start on Friday and be the 16th starting pitcher that the Tigers have used this season. This would have been the spot that Garrett Hill slotted into, but they actually moved him to Saturday, which is going to be just potentially disastrous. He's facing off against Shane McClanahan, who's 10-4 on the season with a 2.07 ERA and a .83 WHIP. He's striking out 12 batters per 9 innings and only walking 2 per 9 innings with a batting average on balls in play of .244. Hill, on the other hand, has a 5.88 ERA with a 5.65 FIP, and he has a hard hit rate of about 32%. So again, right at about 1 out of every 3 hitters is going to hit the ball hard against Garrett Hill. Saturday's a big day, and we're going to talk about Saturday in a little bit, because one of the greater Tigers of all time is going to be honored on Saturday. I just hope that the effort on the field can match the celebration that's going to take place. Now, Game 4, Sunday, 1:40, the finale. Tampa Bay, it's to be determined. But they're going to be facing off against Matt Manning, who is back off of the IL. Made a start in the finale on Tuesday. Made a start on Tuesday against the Twins and pitched relatively well. He owns a 3.46 ERA with a 1.15 WHIP. He does have a 5.27 FIP, however. So his luck and relying on the defense to turn balls into outs is actually playing into that ERA number a little bit, because his FIP is skyrocketed. And he also has a hard hit rate of about 33%. So, again, 1 out of every 3 batters for the Tampa Bay Rays you can expect to hit the ball hard. Doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be a hit. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to produce runs. It just means that they're hitting the ball 95 miles per hour or harder off of the bat. So let's look specifically at the Tampa Bay Rays and what do they do well. Well, I read you their strikeout per 9 for their starters. Their starter pitching barely walks batters, and they strike out 1 per 9. As a staff, they strike out 1 per 9. And if by some chance you do get on base, they strand base runners at a clip of 75% of the time. They're decent defensively. They're in the top half on Fangraphs of outs against average and defensive runs saved. Like, when I say that it could get ugly for the Tigers coming off of this loss in Minnesota, I'm not kidding. They're playing a really good team in Tampa Bay. Especially coming out of a series where you struck out 41 times in 3 games, and you're getting ready to face a pitching staff that strikes out a batter and inning throughout their starters. McClanahan strikes out 12 per 9 innings. This is a very monumental task that the Tigers have in front of them. When you are sitting 22 games below 500, you have historically been bad on offense. This does not set up well for you. But maybe we can find some silver lining. We thought the same thing against San Diego, and they ended up winning a series. Maybe they can be gritty. Maybe they can scratch across a couple of runs and hold the Tampa Bay offense, which is middle of the road in MLB, down a little bit. But again, sloppy play will be the determining factor in this series. The Rays will not make a lot of mistakes. So you either have to match that or limit the amount that you do make and hope that they don't capitalize on it. The other thing is that they have middle-of-the-road relievers as far as what they don't do well. About 14th, 15th ranked on Fangraph in the league. So if you got to get bats on balls, And you cannot strike out an average of 13 times over the course of these 4 games like you did in Minnesota. You got to get to their bullpen as fast as possible. You got to elevate pitch counts through good at-bats and keep the line moving. These games could end up being sub 3-hour games if Tampa Bay's pitchers are just allowed to cruise. I hope that they find that grit that they had against San Diego and the competitiveness that they played with in Toronto. And they were even relatively competitive in Minnesota. It's just putting the bat on the ball. I mean, that is half of the game. So we'll see. 4 games against Tampa Bay starting Thursday, ending on Sunday. And right there on Saturday night is where we're going to end the show, when something that's been long overdue takes place. Lou Whitaker, sweet Lou Whitaker's number is going to be retired by the Detroit Tigers on August 6th. And it is something that should have happened a long time ago. See, Lou Whitaker is, in the annals of baseball history, one of the most forgotten about better players that has ever played the game. In fact, when you look on Fangraphs or you look on Baseball Reference, he's towards the top in wins above replacement. And for whatever reason, someone who is so integral to a championship team, a team that started the season 35-5 in 1984, a man who was a part of the greatest double play combination of all time, who played 20 years in the major leagues, was off of the Hall of Fame ballot after 1 vote. It's criminal, actually. And I actually wrote an article about how the Hall of Fame is just a mere formality until Lou Whitaker is inducted. Because even in other attempts, he has been snubbed. And he is the greatest Hall of Fame snub of all time. And I just don't understand it. And yet, for whatever reason, it has also taken the Tigers organization a bit of time to actually recognize Lou as well. When Tram's number went up, when he was inducted into the Hall of Fame rightly, you know whose number should have gone up right next to him at the exact same time? His double play partner, Lou Whitaker. I'm going to give you some stats. And we compare second basemen. There are actually 14 second basemen with a lower WAR than Lou Whitaker that are in the Hall of Fame. And I know WAR is not an end-all stat, but it's a good indication. You're talking about a guy who, over his career, brought the Detroit Tigers, according to Baseball Reference, 75 wins above a replacement player. That's up there. Now, let's compare him to some Hall of Fame second basemen, namely Joe Morgan, Roberto Alomar, and Ryne Sandberg. When you look at Lou's stats compared to these guys, he has a higher average than Joe Morgan. He has a higher on-base percentage than Ryne Sandberg. He has just a 1 point lower slugging percentage than Joe Morgan. He hit more home runs than Roberto Alomar. He drove in more runs than Ryne Sandberg. And has a defensive WAR that is higher than all 3 of them. Not to mention, he has a higher WAR than Ryne Sandberg for his career. He has a higher WAR than Roberto Alomar for his career. And He's got a World Series win. He has the same amount of silver sluggers that Roberto Alomar has and 3 more silver sluggers than Joe Morgan has. And none of these other 3 guys were named Rookie of the Year. Sure, Lou doesn't have the All-Star games. He's got 5 compared to 10 for Morgan and Sandberg and 12 for Alomar. He's got 3 Gold Gloves, though, as opposed to 5 for Morgan. It's not that much of a difference. Why is he not getting his due? And why have the Tigers waited so long to do this? I am so happy for Lou Whitaker this Saturday. Because finally, someone in baseball, even though it took a long time, but finally the organization that he gave 20 years to and brought a world, or helped bring a World Series championship to this town, the last one that we've experienced, is getting his due. So thankfully, no other Tiger will wear number 1 again. And on that back brick wall of Comerica Park, just to the left of the fountains, hanging next to number 3, his teammate, and number 47, his teammate as well, is going to be a number 1, and on the bottom of it, it's going to say Whitaker. Because Sweet Lou deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. And even if Cooperstown can't get it right, at least Chris Ilitch and the Detroit Tigers organization finally did. And that's going to do it for us here on The Corner. We do want to remember and send our condolences to Dodgers Nation and all Dodgers fans and all baseball fans because of the loss of the great Vin Scully that Matt and I discussed earlier on the show. I appreciate you sticking by and hanging out. I do want to remind you to make sure that you click that like button, hit that subscribe, and hit that bell to get all of your Detroit Sports Nation news on YouTube, because we cover everything. And you can also follow me on the Twitter, DSN at The Corner. I am AJ Riley, and I will see you before the next series after this series with the Tampa Bay Rays. And until then, as always, even though it's hard to say,